was a doorman back in the early 80s. Then we had to have local county council licences. So I had 4 or 5 different licences. I had one for Macclesfield, one for Manchester. When I worked in London, I went on one of the first Westminster courses. So that how long ago it was. I stopped working during the process of licensing, so it's quite a long time ago now. I mean, I agree absolutely with licensing in the security industry. I agree. You cannot. It's a contradiction. You cannot have security, someone working in security, and not be licensed. I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? You have to have one to have the other. I mean, by licensing someone, you're making it, in theory, harder to get into because you're providing training, you're providing the structure in order to be a better door supervisor. But licensing has opened up door supervision to absolutely everybody. It hasn't made it harder to get into, it's made it available to everybody, whether you speak English or not, whether you're 18 or 80. And I went on a course, a door supervisor, SIA door supervisor's course, just to see what the training is like, because I was quite interested. I wanted to write about the course, and I was quite shocked because there was 3 or 4 people that the dole had sent because they needed to attend the course in order to get off work or whatever, in order to continue with their benefits. So that was no good. So they're the people that we don't want on the course. There was a 65-year-old lady, bless her, lovely little old lady with a dog. She wanted to work the doors. And there was a mixture of people that I thought, how on earth are you going to be working the doors? No disrespect to these people, but they weren't doormen. They were people that were there because they either had to be there or thought it was a bit of a laugher or something I might like to do, like this 65-year-old. And that's what the SIA has done. It's commercialised training, and it's opened up to everybody. You have a 100% guaranteed pass rate. Well, you can't professionalise an industry if you have a 100% pass rate. That's a contradiction. You can't do that, can you? It doesn't make sense. So yes, I believe in SIA, security industry licensing. I do believe in that, and I do think that is necessary, especially in this world, of course, with accountability and background checks, and so, I do believe in that, but it's opened up to everybody. It hasn't made it any more professional. And I'm a bit of a contradiction too, because I don't believe in violence, I don't believe in aggression, and I don't believe in intimidation. These things don't generally work. But if you're dealing with a group of scroats on a Saturday night who want to come in, you have to be able to be a force to stop them. You have to be intimidating enough for them not to not to cross you and not to go in the pub. And a lot of doormen, again, no disrespect, they're not those sort of people. Back in the 80s, we had a really good team of people. We depended upon them, absolutely. When we would go into a fight or an aggressive or violent situation, we knew absolutely 100% that everybody we worked with was behind us and had our backs. And I don't think people have that now. Because there's just such a mixture of people doing the doors, there's the people that don't mind a bit of a scrap and don't mind mixing it and don't mind confronting the aggression and violence, and there's people that they don't want to do it at all. They're only there to earn a few quid and an extra job. So I think that's probably changed. I think that is one of the big differences. We had a team of people back then, and we were very, very close with regards to working in that environment. I don't think there is that anymore. I don't know, but I don't think so. And again, from what I've heard, I don't think so. We also have CCTV now, and we have all these kind of things that we never had back then. So I suppose that's a good thing, because you can't get, as a doorman, you can't get away with anything, and as a customer, they can't either. But now it seems, oh, you won't leave, sir. Okay, I'll call the police. We never ever called the police back then, as if the police don't have enough to do now with the soaring crime rates in the society. Doormen just threw them out, just got them out. If there was a situation and they didn't want to go, we just threw them out. That was as simple as that. But now it's, oh, I'm going to call the police, which I think is ridiculous. You're in security, you're sorting out a door, you're looking after your venue. Sort it out yourself, don't call the police, they've got enough to do on a Saturday night. So I think that's changed too, and I hear that a lot, and I hear that kind of, everyone says, we can't actually physically, or we have to be very careful when we're physically throwing someone out now, and if it's going to be, if it looks violence, we can't put ourselves in a violent situation. And they said that on the course, on the door supervisor's course, don't put yourself in a violent situation, call the police. Well, you are working in a violent environment, it can be. You are, by default, a doorman putting yourself in a violent situation. coping with the fear of not knowing what's going to happen. I mean, I worked in London and I worked up in Standish in near Wigan and in Manchester. There were some huge fights, really big, where it seemed as though the whole nightclub was fighting each other, really. And I think although your adrenaline is rushing and you become aggressive because you need to, I think the fear, that's one of the hardest things, is coping with the fear that you may get quite severely injured, and a lot of people did, of course, and people died on the door, and people have had horrific injuries. And I found that as I got older, and my daughter, for a few years at the beginning of my daughter's life, I thought to myself over and over again, do I need this? Do I need to go in to fight some huge scumbag that's, intent of causing as much disruption as possible just to earn a tenner so I can go home? Is it worth it? And I found that quite hard. And that led to me eventually leaving the doors. But I found that was one of the hardest things to cope with. Once we were on a nightclub door at the Lock in Manchester, Deansgate Locks, and there was just me and one other guy outside, and we heard this rumble. It was on football night, football day rather, in the afternoons, and we heard a rumble, a real big rumble, and suddenly we were surrounded by 30 or 40 football hooligans that wanted to storm the door, and that was just me and one other guy on the door. The fear that you have at that situation, what am I going to do? And they were spitting at us, and we were getting covered in spit, and they were flicking their cigarettes at. Now, what do you do? How do you cope with that? These are tricky things. The police turned up, and there were the police, the sirens, police behind, and they dispersed quickly. But it could have gone the other way, of course. So I think that is one of the hardest things that I had had to cope with while I was working the doors. Just the kind of the intense fear of what is going to happen. Am I actually going to last? And what's going to happen to me? I think that's kind of, I don't know if you get that now. You must do. That must happen now, and a doorman must kind of associate with that. You can pretend you're hard and you're tough, and back then I was a bit stupid, and I didn't mind who I took on. I really didn't. I mean, I'm not a tough guy now, and I wasn't really, but I didn't have a fear of fighting someone because I thought I knew enough about how I could cope in an aggressive and violent situation. I didn't fear that. I feared the consequences of what could happen if things went wrong, and that eventually led to me leaving door work. Yeah. I think it takes a variety of things. I think you need to be consistent. You need to be able to stand up and have the ability and facility and the mindset to stand up to aggression and to stand up to violence and to be able to deal with them. There's a fight or flight philosophy, isn't there? When you ever encounter a violent and aggressive or difficult situation. When you encounter something overwhelming or intimidating, you're instinctively going to run away. Unless you've had any training, unless you know how to react otherwise, you're going to run away. That's a flight, and a good door supervisor cannot run away. It's impossible. You just cannot do it, because you're leaving your teammates vulnerable, you're leaving everybody vulnerable, you're leaving and you're allowing whoever's caused you to intimidate you to walk over you and to take control, which is it's not what you should do. You can freeze too, and people forget about that, but a lot of people in intimidating and difficult situations, they don't know what to do. They freeze completely. Their mind just goes blank. They don't run away and they don't fight, so they freeze. And again, as a door supervisor, you cannot freeze. It's something that you cannot do. So a good supervisor, door supervisor, should have the mindset and the training and the ability to fight. It doesn't necessarily mean physical fighting, but fighting verbally and fighting to save yourself and to save the team and to save the situation. And it could be by just really good conflict management and discussion and talking someone down. That is fighting. It doesn't have to be physical fighting. Doormen aren't paid any more than when I worked the door back in the 80s. We got around 8 or 10 quid an hour back then, and that was good money actually. We could live off it. We could work 4 or 5 nights a week. That was our full-time wage. 8 or 9 quid an hour back in the early 80s to the 90s. Quite good wages. That's all the doormen are getting paid now. wages have not gone up at all. I mean, it's just really terrible. In any other business, if a sales assistant got spat at, or got thrown drink over, or got abused, it would never be accepted in daily life, but it is accepted as a doorman. That's just one of the jobs, and you get paid 7, 8, 9, 10 quid an hour. I think it's terrible. I had a conversation with a managing director about a year ago of one of the biggest security companies, and I pissed him off a bit actually. And he's a multi-millionaire. He has a villa abroad. I won't say where, because otherwise he'll identify. And he said, if we paid our doorman any more, we couldn't survive as a company. And I said, no, if you paid your doorman any more, you wouldn't be a multi-millionaire. It's as simple as that. You wouldn't have made as much money as you would have made if you had to pay your doorman £1 or £2. It's got nothing to do with surviving as a company, because you would survive as a company making half the profit that you do now. And he was a bit pissed with it, to be honest, understandably. I think there are some brilliant security company managers and owners, there are, but there are an awful lot of horrible, greedy people that don't want to pay their doorman and don't care about their doorman and don't provide a service and back up and support to their doorman. There are loads of them, and that's the really bad thing about the industry. But there's no unity. There's no one saying all the doormen are going to go on strike on Saturday night because we want better pay. Nobody will ever say that. But can you imagine if England didn't have any, Scotland or Wales or wherever, didn't have any doormen one Saturday night? It would be mayhem and madness and terrible. But nobody's willing to stand up for it. So to answer the question, no, doormen are not getting paid as much as they should do, especially in some of the conditions and circumstances they have to work in. There are a couple of reasons why, I think, again in my limited opinion. Firstly, the security owners, like any businesses, want to make as much money as possible. And secondly, there are so many companies out there quoting for the same job. And my company will quote you 14 quid, but I can go to next door's company and get them for 13 quid. And someone else will come in at 12 quid, and someone else will come in at 10 quid, therefore I can't pay my doorman very much. That's the reason. If there was a standard wage, but there isn't, and they won't, like any job. You go to a plumber, you get 50 quid, or you pay £1,000. You know, I mean, there's such a difference, and I think that's the trouble with this industry as well. But I do think greed for the owners is a big one, and I know quite a few owners of some big companies, and they're hugely wealthy people, and their doormen struggle to survive. I'm a bit of a socialist, I think. I don't agree with that at all. You know, look after your staff, and your staff will look after you all the time, every time, without fail. Don't care about your staff, and that also happens, and that's why the industry is a mess sometimes too. You know, nobody cares about the staff, so why should the staff care about the industry?